We often think of ourselves as an entrepreneur, just our business. We don't often think of ourselves as a brand. And today, we're really going to hit that and we're going to understand what it takes to brand ourselves. So, welcome to the Serial Entrepreneur Club, where we try to figure out what it is that serial entrepreneurs do over and over again to start, scale, exit, repeat. And I just taught another cohort at FAU last week with a group of about 20 entrepreneurs. And we talked a lot about this process and the systems and the things that startups need to do to increase their chances of success. If you haven't already joined an incubator, we ask that you do. I think that it increases your chances of success for your startup dramatically. In fact, we did an episode, you can catch that on www.startup.club. Hey, Mike, welcome to the show. We're very excited to have you on here. I just want to let everybody here know that Mike Alden is a best-selling author. His website is mikealden.com, and you can check him out there. He's done a number of books. He's also a serial entrepreneur. So if anyone's cracked the code of what does it take to a startup to succeed, he is one of those individuals. And Michelle's going to be our lead moderator. Take it away, Michele.
Excellent. Mike, it's a real pleasure to have you here actually on our 50th episode. So it's a big day for us, a big episode, and we feel honored that you're joining us. So let's just jump right into it, Mike.
Let's do it. Wow, geez, I didn't realize it was the 50th. I don't know, maybe we should have picked somebody else.
No, you're perfect. Absolutely perfect. So first, a little, message here to the audience. We're going to quickly move to questions, and we're going to even open up the floor to folks that want to tell Mike their ideas about branding themselves or writing a book or a podcast so that he can give you some feedback, as well as you can ask Mike any questions you like about his topic, which is branding. I'll just start off here with a question. I'm curious about branding yourself as an author, an entrepreneur. How is that different from branding yourself as a company?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I've done both. And I've actually struggled with the latter of branding a company. We talked about this before. I've generated hundreds of millions of dollars. My companies have sold products all over the world. And we've sold a lot of different types of products, from books, obviously, we'll talk a lot about that, to dietary supplements, to widgets and courses and everything in between. And the name of my primary company is called Blue Vase Marketing. And a lot of these products and services, though, that you see, if you've ever watched television over the past 13 years, you've probably seen me on television promoting one of these products. But it was under the banner of really the product itself. So it was really difficult for us to brand the business of Blue Vase Marketing. The branding of marketing for us has always been for more of on a business to business scenario. As far as myself individually, also struggle with that throughout the years, because having been on television throughout the years, and I was literally on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, all over the world for years. And we know that television is a dying medium, and the same with radio, but I'm not famous because I paid for that time. And so it's not like I would walk into a store or somewhere and people would recognize me. That happened, a couple times, but it was very rare. But I was building businesses. We talked about this a little while ago, in businesses that, again, have generated all this money and sold all these different products. But I also, as an entrepreneur, wanted to let the world know who I was. I wasn't just an infomercial guy. You hear the word infomercial, still has a bit of a negative connotation to it. But I always tell people, I say, look, love him or hate him, Barack Obama was actually elected as a result of an infomercial. People don't realize that. He did 8 30-minute national infomercials, and that really put him over the top. So the power of direct response marketing is what we're really talking about, is a very powerful medium. And now, all that stuff that I've been talking about as far as television or even radio, it's all happening. It's just on a different medium now. You look at guys like Tai Lopez, who's just an amazing marketer and just a brand builder. This guy has been doing infomercials on Snapchat, right? It's the same thing. You look at guys like Grant Cardone, who I've connected with as a result of my podcast and my books, and we can talk a little bit about that. These guys are just doing infomercials. That's all we're really talking about. They're just doing it in a different format and in a different medium. But for me, and for I think many entrepreneurs, the power of a book is something that you can take with you forever. Your legacy will always be there. There'll always be somewhere to find that book. And I still believe today, even though we're reading a little bit differently and we're consuming our media a little bit differently, I believe that if you have a story, if you have a skill set, writing a book and getting it to the masses is one of the greatest ways to build your personal brand.
Well,
But
that's
it sounds if you write it, they won't just come. It sounds, again, I got introduced to Mike through Mike Alshore here on stage as well, but because I signed a publishing deal with Forbes Advantage, and we're launching the book Start, Scale, Exit, Repeat. So my question to you, Mike, is we're putting a lot of work into this, and I'm telling you, it's a multi-year project, which is likely to conclude over the next 6 months. But that's not enough, is it? Like, what are the other things that I need to do, or anyone in this audience needs to do to make this successful?
Yeah, it's my good friend Larry Benet is popped in the room too, and he's been really instrumental in a lot of my success in the publishing space, and because of the connections that he's introduced me to. And you talked about the preparation, and I'm a pretty simple guy, right? I've been a simple guy my whole life. I am a lawyer by trade, but I was talking about this a little bit earlier. When I was in law school, I had to read every word, and I had to put in the work. But what you just mentioned, it's been a multi-year process, and nothing worth anything happens overnight. And nobody likes the non-sexy stuff. Nobody likes the behind the scenes preparation that you need to do in order to be successful. We live in this world where we want to pop a pill and we want immediate results. We live in this instant gratification world of likes and hearts and all these things that hit us with that dopamine rush, because that's just the world we're living in. But the successful people like yourself and the successful people that are on stage and the people that are in the audience, the people that have done real stuff, recognize and they understand that you need to put in not only the work, but the preparation. It's not a bulletproof answer to success, but everything that I've ever done in which I've been successful at, I've put in all those hours where nobody's looking, right? Where nobody really cares. And I'm not telling anybody about it either. You go back to law school. When I was in law school, I went to law school nights while I was working. And for 4 years, because if you go to law school nights, it's 4, not 3. For 4 years, I didn't talk to anybody. Except my fellow law student colleagues and also maybe the people that I worked with. My friends, I barely even talked to my relatives because I knew that I needed to put in the work. And so you had talked again about the preparation and the time involved. There's a lot of sacrifice involved. This stuff might sound like somewhat cliche-ish to some people, but it's real. And you know what? I don't care what anybody tells you. Nobody likes doing it. I don't like having to sit in meetings and go over numbers with my accounting staff, or sitting in meetings with my CIO and going over code because I don't understand it. I don't like thinking about how exactly a funnel works and going over the certain steps that you need to go over in order for a funnel to actually work properly. But I also know in order for it to really be successful, I do need to understand it on a certain level. So to answer your question, and this better than anybody, you do have to put in that work and you have to be consistent. So many of my salespeople, I love this when they come, they say, "Hey, Mike, listen, I followed the script that you wrote." I said, "Yeah, we wrote that 15 years ago. It still works." And I'll never forget, it was actually my father who came to me. My dad, he comes in my office, he says, "Mike, I followed that script. I followed that method. And I sold more than I've ever sold ever." And I just kind of smiled, but I was also irritated with him because one is my dad, and two, it's just, yeah, the system works because I put in the work and now you're putting in the work. So if you put in the work consistently over time, because it's not just about putting in the work today or tomorrow or the next day, it's consistent. Most people, especially salespeople, are consistently inconsistent. And by the way, I'm as real as it gets, as you can probably tell from my voice. I'm inconsistent a lot too, but I'm also self-aware of the fact that, hey, man, you know what? You screwed up yesterday. You didn't do what you needed to do in order to maintain your consistency. So you got to go back to it. And let's start from where we were yesterday and consistently build upon that. So it's doing the work, it's preparing, and it's about being consistent, especially when you don't want to.
Wow. I love what you're saying. So here's a question. You're making me think. I'm drawing some analogies here to branding as a company and branding yourself, which you've talked about and explained to us. So it's our brand assets as entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs. You talked about your experience, what you're good at, your knowledge. What else would we consider our brand assets when we're really sitting down and thinking about the direction that we should go with our book or our podcast and just our overall personal brand strategy?
Yeah, I think it's authenticity is really the key thing that a lot of us are lacking. So many of us want to be something else. So many of us aspire to achieve certain things, and we're trying to be the thing that we're really not, but we're trying to get there. So we try to act like we're already there. And that is so transparent through, for me, it is. I can just tell right away when someone who's acting, they're just faking it until they make it, right? So I think really, if you truly want to build your brand, if you want to cut through all the clutter that's out there, see, the thing is, here's the greatest thing about, here's the good and bad about social media. You open up an account, you get some followers, you post, you do some things, and anybody can do it. Anybody can do it, and that's a great thing. The barrier of entry is zero. We meant, I were talking about this before we got on this call. That's also a bad thing, because a lot of people see the success of others, and they see the Instagram, videos and the Snapchats and now TikToks and everything else, and they want to be something that they're not, and so they try to act like they are. So I always say, let's put in the preparation, let's put in the work so you can get there and then you can post about it. So truly, you have to think about your own authenticity. And look, I talk about this in my books. The easiest person to lie to is yourself. And it's really easy to do by posting things on Instagram or Snapchat or Facebook or whatever and believe your own bullshit. So you start to believe it, and then you think it's reality when it's really not, because you're not doing the things that are necessary in order to be successful. I mentioned my friend Larry Benet. I think he's still here. I was at an event that he put on years ago, and Harvey Mackay spoke, and Harvey's written, I don't know, like 30 books, and super successful guy, and just a dynamo. And he says, look, there is no pill, powder, or potion that is going to change the way you're going to become successful. The technology is changing. It might make things a little bit easier, but at the end of the day, you have to do the work. And again, back to what I said before, I don't necessarily like doing it. But if you want to be authentic, you need to put in the work of your own authenticity. You also need to be self aware. See, I just got off the phone. I was just a few minutes ago. I was on the phone with my therapist. Now, people don't tell people are talking about it now. Oh, mental health, it's a thing now because of COVID. I've been going to a therapist my entire life to check myself, because I need to make sure that I'm self-aware of really who I am and what I'm trying to do. And the thing is about that is I am self-aware. I know who I am. I know what I'm doing. I know that I'm not even close to where I want to be, but I am me. So if you really want to connect with people, if you want to grow your business, if you want to grow your brand, you need to first stop lying to yourself, be authentic with yourself, and then that authenticity, it will come through not only here on this medium, but wherever you are.
Yeah, and I think that's true for Clubhouse too. Is when anyone comes on stage, if I've seen it with some of the big corporations who come on and they're so scripted, it doesn't work. But you come on here and you're authentic, you're real, you are yourself. It makes a big difference. Now you do the hard work. You're authentic. The book is done. Going back, not being selfish here, but I'm using it as the example. Start, scale, exit, repeat. The book that's going to launch later this year. We've done all the hard work. We believe it's a masterpiece here at Startup Club. What's next? What are the actual specific things we can do to promote that book and the whole messaging behind it?
Yeah, my first book, Ask More, Get More, which was written in 2014, and Greenleaf was my publisher. As a marketer and an entrepreneur, over $200 million marketing products, and I feel like I'm a pretty good entrepreneur. I've lost big throughout the years, and for those of my story, I've lost millions. I've lost millions in a day sometimes. And when I think about your question and what's next and what you really need to do. I love what you said to me earlier. See, most people, most authors, right? They think that masterpiece that you just mentioned is just going to be because it is. No, that's not really the case. Like my first book, Ask More, Get More. Look, it was written in 2014. It did big things. The title in and of itself is a sexy title. I always tell people, look, you take my book, you put her on your kitchen table, you put her on a coffee table. It's not going to do anything for you unless you read it and implement it. The title of that book, Ask More, Get More, just speaks for itself. So what do you need to do? It goes back to my first kind of principles of thinking of putting together a plan and executing on that plan consistently so that you can get the word out. Here's the little dirty secret about the publishing space. And this is why I've been helping authors now, because I've spent millions marketing my own books. And I wish I had most of it back because I did ridiculous things. I wrapped NASCARs with my books. And by the way, my first race was the Daytona 500, not some little side thing. And I did it like dozens of times. I sponsored a guy in the World Series of Poker. I've done the Hudson book deals. I've been in my books, so they're sold all over the world for a reason. A lot of that stuff, though, was mistakes that I made. But as it relates to a book, and it somewhat translates to most products, is putting in that work and also marketing it in a way that's going to yield results. As a direct response marketer, every time I spend $1, I need to see 2 come back, and it needs to be even more than that. 2 comes back to me, and I'm like losing a little bit of money. And so when you think about your plan, your product, your marketing, you also need to think about, what's my budget? Like, how am I going to do this? Because the whole idea of something going viral, I know that TikTok, people get excited and you got some video that that pops. My question to a lot of these people who say, "Oh, I had a video that went viral," or "I have X amount of followers on Instagram." Look, I have almost 17,000 followers on Instagram. They're not very active. I'm not actually that active on Instagram. Those people won't necessarily and haven't really necessarily translated into sales for me for my books. But I do say to you, to answer your question, if you are going to market, you need to say to yourself, how am I going to allocate resources, i.e. cash, in order to yield the results? And when you think about all the different mediums that are out there, marketing, again, we mentioned them all: Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Google Ads, the email campaigns, SMS, text messaging. There are so many different things. As a direct response marketer, I say test and measure early so you can figure out what exactly works. As someone who has done this over and over again and failed most of the times, I've developed a system, and I'm not promoting it but I've developed a system that it just works, but it cost me millions of dollars to figure it out. So the dirty secret that I was trying to get to is that, and in no disrespect to anybody, but most people don't care. People don't care about your book launch. They're not really, they really don't. And by the way, how do I know this? Because it happened to me. My own family members. You know how hard it is to get your parents to buy a book? My dad and my mom bought my first book, and all they did was turn to the index and look for mom and dad so that they could see what I wrote about them. But when I asked them to buy the book in an effort to help me try and hit these lists that I've always achieved, it was really difficult to do. So it's thinking about, how am I going to allocate the resources? And to expand on it a little bit more, if you don't mind, it goes to the very essence of my first book, Ask More, Get More. And I know there's been other books out there, and there's books before that. And look, every book that's ever been written, we're all just expanding off of really probably one of the first books ever written, which is really the Bible, right? It's all our own version of what we all already know. But you have to ask. You see, when you write your book, I would say, maybe just over halfway done, maybe 60% of the way there. That other 40% is way harder than actually writing the book, because now you need to figure out, how am I going to sell this book? So you have a great medium here, Colin, right? You have almost 900,000, almost 1 million people here. So you have this built-in audience that I think is going to really just blow your book out of the water. And by the way, Forbes and Adam Woody is great, who Michael also introduced me to. A lot of people don't have this. And so you need to put in all that stuff, all that work way in advance. All of my books, by the way, have had a 6-month run up, meaning when the book was available, ready for sale, we marketed for 6 months, not 2 weeks, not a month, 6 months. And that's what allowed me to continue to build my brand as an author. And then when you have success with books, then other big things and other great things come.
Holy
Can I
shit! I got a
just?
lot of work to do. I got a
Yeah,
lot of
you
work to
do.
do.
I'd love to just jump in. This is Michael Altschuler. First of all, Michael Alden is the real deal and is a very dear friend of mine. When he said he was speaking to his therapist earlier, we were talking earlier. For a moment, I thought he was talking about our
I talked to you
conversation.
first,
But
and then the therapist.
the, what I do want to say is I was fortunate enough to have Michael as a friend and to say this is a marathon, not a sprint. I created a book, wrote a book during the pandemic. It became a bestseller on Amazon in 4 different categories because of Mike Alden. Now, although this is a journey, not a sprint, I can say there is a shortcut. And smart people learn from their own mistakes. Smarter people learn from the mistakes of others. You heard Michael talk about the millions that he lost, time that he lost, and all the things that he's done his whole life. Those were learning lessons that you don't have to experience all yourself. You can call a person like Mike or who he referred me to, who saved me time, money, energy, and effort, and allowed me to sprint during this long run to get to the finish line faster. And the ultimate finish line was becoming a bestseller. So if you do want to short, it's still, like I said, it's still a long run, and it was extremely hard work, morning, noon, and night, writing this book and then getting it to number one. But if you're committed to doing the work and you want to get the best advice, you limit the number of mistakes you make, connect with someone who's done it before, who's gone through all the trials and tribulations, and that way you won't have to, at least as much, and you'll get to the finish line with less bruises and bumps and cuts and everything else that goes on. So I just want to say, Michael, thank you for everything you've done. And I would encourage everyone to follow up and follow Michael's advice, and he'll give you connections and tell you who you should go to so you don't, like I said, go through the rigors that you would not necessarily go through if you did it all yourself. I'm out.
Great. Thank you so much, Mike and Michael. And to Mike's point, and also so you don't lose a whole lot of money that was badly spent. So, on that note, we have some members of the club who want to talk to Michael. So, Jeff the entertainer, what is your question first for Mike?
Just before he asks it, I'm not going to answer his question. I'm sorry.
Uh-oh.
No, I'm only kidding.
I think you might know
this
him.
is why this is why I freaking love Mike Alden. Okay, so literally, those who don't know me, I'm Jeff the Entertainer, always trying to entertain her. I branded my name as Jeff the Entrepreneur because what Mike was saying about authenticity. Which is why I love Mike, because he's so authentic. He's the best guy to be around. And literally, his book, I actually was going through my highlights today, Blueprint for Business. I actually just started reading Ask More, Get More. I got to get up to that. Was one of the best books I've ever read. And I wish I had it before I just started the entrepreneur journey. The stories Mike's been through are just unbelievable. Actually, I do have a question for Mike. With that said, I think always, all the time, John C. Maxwell, I was at a conference with him, and they asked him, why do you write so many books? And he said, you know what, to get to people that I might never talk to or may never reach. And Mike, I totally sympathize with you. I think there's certain things. I wrote a little lead generation book on Instagram, and the family and everybody didn't buy it. When my brother came out with his book, I bought it right away. I always try and buy so many books just to support them. Now I buy them to read them. My question actually for you, Mike, because you're legendary in the marketing space in so many different levels. What's one of the most painful stories that kind of came through? Because you come on here, you just talk about stuff, and maybe not just ad spend, just you personally, because you've overcome so much. I think you're one of the strongest guys I know. Everything that I've been through, yeah, I lost my brother, I'm going to build a business, and it's sad and stuff. We all lose people. You've been through everything, and you've come back stronger than anybody. So what's one of those things that kind of just inspires me? What one of the moments there in your life?
Personally,
Yeah, personally.
yeah, look, it's the way I grew up. The first line of my first book, Ask More, Get More, is the first thing I say is, thank God I was born poor. People have heard me say this before, and my mom doesn't like how I start out with it, but I'll give you the answer to it in a second to why my mom doesn't like it. But my mom's HIV positive. My stepfather died of AIDS. My father was addicted to coke. Kid I grew up with in jail for life for murder. My stepmother just recently died of an overdose. Another brother of mine died of an overdose. Both of my grandparents were hardcore alcoholics. I have a cousin who did 5 years. Another brother did time in prison. And I remember what it was like standing in the separate line in elementary school, middle school, and high school because my lunch was subsidized by the state. They made you had to stand in a separate line and you had to hand this little card. And I still to this day remember what that feels like. I remember what it was like to have the Salvation Army subsidizing Christmas and Thanksgiving. I remember what it was like waking up in the morning and my mom asking me to go outside to warm up the car, and I would go outside and the car wasn't there. And it wasn't because it was stolen, because it was repossessed. And so all those things, when people talk about adversity and going through difficult times in life, we all have those stories, and it's a decision that you have to make for yourself on whether or not you're going to be a product of your environment or you're going to use that to your advantage. So many people can just lean on that experience. And look, when I was 17, I was shot at point blank, like within 2 feet. And I don't even think Michael also knows that. I had a guy point a gun at my head and pull the trigger. And so you think about those times in life and those difficult times in life, and you look back and say, man, I'm glad I made it through, and thank God I made it through. And so when you go through that shit, and looking at a book called Shift, and we hear the stories all the time, it's a decision that you have to make. When my brother Dominic died of an overdose, I just knew at some point it wasn't a matter of if, it was when. And people would say, hey, Mike, you need to talk to him. You need to get through to him. You need to do all this stuff. And I did. But at some point in my life, I needed to make a decision that I wasn't going to be that kid. When I was 14 years old, my father took me for a long walk on the beach. I was 14, okay? And you could just imagine what my life was like and the things that I did when I was a kid. And he takes me for a long walk on the beach and he says, look, if you're going to be a criminal, if you're going to do the bad things that you continue to do at 14, again, you can just only imagine the things I did. He said, let's do it right. I said, what do you mean? He goes, if you really want to go this road, I can introduce you to gangsters. I can introduce you to fellow drug dealers. And if that's what you really want to do, you need to be prepared that you're going to prison, that you're going to get shot, and that you may not make it through. And I had people tell me that I'll never make it through. My guidance counselor, when I finally turned my life around at 15, my senior year in high school, I was class president and captain of the football team, and I had virtually straight A's my senior year. And I was trying to make something in my life, and my guidance counselor, his name is Mr. Sheriff, and I thank him for this. He said, Mike, college isn't for everybody. And I felt like saying, fuck you, man. But it was such a gift because people talk about the fuel and the difficulties that they go through. If you really think about where you're at today and all the things that you went through, because we all have our own version of just what I just told you, and you use it to your advantage. You've probably seen some of my posts on Instagram where I put a chip on my shoulder. Like, I have a chip on my shoulder. I'm still that kid from the projects. I still have something to prove. That, for me, it was some of the most difficult things that I've ever gone through. And again, I lost $1 million in one day. And like, I had merchant accounts shut down. I had bank accounts frozen. And I'm a good person. I've run businesses for a long time. I have employees. And I remember saying to myself, when that happened to me that one day, I couldn't believe it. And I'm like, man, like, why is this happening to me? And when you're going through that, I don't care what anybody says, it's virtually impossible to see the silver lining or to see the positive thing. But I will tell you this, that if you can get through, Winston Churchill talks about, if you're going to go through hell, you might as well go all the way through. If you can get through it and come out the other side, you can take all that stuff and use it to your advantage.
I never thought that all of these negative things that happen to us in our lives can be used to build who we are, and then use those things in a positive way to help or even create a brand. I find that fascinating. I never connected that before until you said that.
Yeah. That's what kind of, I don't know if my phone, the whole time you're talking, Mike, man, I love that. Like, you inspire me, man. And so I'm going to be put on an event probably sometime in October. I was talking to a guy, Changing Lives. Mike will be speaking at it. My goal is to blow up people like Mike as much as they can. Mike introduced me to a bunch of publishers. I'm having a book come out, and it's getting written right now as my life goes on. By the way, did anybody hear this little dinging in the background, or is this just my phone just messing everything up? Do you hear this?
Just you, Jeff.
Okay,
But
well,
but
good.
I
It's
want to hear
driving me
more about
nuts.
this.
Mike's telling his whole story, and I have this ding. It's one of those tile things because I lose stuff all the time. So someone got me tile for Christmas, and it's going off. But Mike, your story is so inspiring. What we've been through, and yeah, Colin, 100%. How I built my brand was and literally just tell him. And I think it was Ed I went to a first MLM thing, and the guy said we have to tell our old story to new people every day. And ever since then, it was right after I lost my brother to drugs, fentanyl. I was shelled, didn't know where I was going. And I decided I was going to build a coffee shop music studio in honor of him. Just Gary Vee. I watched a lot of Gary Vee. And now he branded, hey, I'm going to buy the Jets one day. I was like, let me do it that way. And that's present day what it's been. And since then, I failed a lot in software. I put thousands in everything, but it led me to a point now that now I own a consulting firm. I guess I know a little bit about marketing. I don't even know. I just know a lot of connections, which is what Michael is talking about. And I don't want to see people fail. And I really do truly care with my souls. And Mike has that. And that's why me and Mike are going to be doing a lot of great things together. And I saw him in the room and I was like, I'm trying not to go on Clubhouse. And I'm like, no, for Mike Alden, man, anytime you need anything to do. Mike, I haven't forgotten about the podcast. We're going to have you on. I'm negotiating my editors right now, like a hard-nosed entrepreneur. They up their prices. I said, hey guys, you can charge more, but not me. But they're charging me more, so I might have to go somewhere else.
So, Jeff, this is for you and Mike, both of you. And I noticed that you talked about you have a podcast, you're writing a book. It'd be nice to know the name of that book. Just I don't know if you have it or not in your head
Yeah,
yet.
Getting Rich in a
But it
Recession.
seems like Getting Rich in Recession. I like it. I love it. And now, so it seems you don't just do one thing. It seems like you create these multiple channels. And I'm hoping, Jeff, you can talk about that. And Mike, you can also follow up on that.
Yeah, really quick. So in marketing, I think Mike will agree, everything on a vertical, right? From top to bottom becomes the same. And then as long as you can carry it with your same brand message, which I wasn't for years, I was just like, hey, I'm figuring out I'm Jeff the Entrepreneur. If you look at my Instagram, it was literally, I took pride in the fact that I was all over the place. I took pride in the fact that I didn't know what I was doing and I was going to figure it out. And everybody was worried. It was like, follow the journey. Now that I've figured out a few things, in a sense, it's really the beginning from really, and this is life. This is us on Clubhouse and everybody here, just everybody reaching out, being genuinely interested in somebody else for it. It's something that you like about them. Like Colin, you were just like that. And then all the way to the end of really just nurturing the relationship. I've said it before, I'll say it again. It's your life. You get to pick people you want up with you. And when you have everything in a straight line on it, then it plugs in the same level. And you just realize, and once you get really clear on where you want to be, but also the people that you want to bring up with you and help, then it all falls into place, which I've learned time and time again. Everything, it almost becomes, when it starts becoming boring and doing the work, that's when you know you're doing something right. When you're showing up and like, oh no, this is how you tell your story again. Oh, now I'm being a subject matter expert. And then us crazy entrepreneurs and marketers, then we go challenge ourselves with something new, whether it's the metaverse or NFTs or anything like that. But at the same time, if you just stay in a very lane, and this was one thing I had a very tough time doing, and I think this is any entrepreneur, just have one avatar, one product, and one offer. And then once you do that, then the other ones get built in. So it started with the podcast. That's why I think Mike and what he does is amazingly good. Podcast or book, that's the best thing in branding you can do right then. I think podcast is better because you could do connections right away. You could have Mike on, I could have you, Colin, on, or you can have people on, and then you can repurpose that content everywhere you go. That can then lead into book. You can write a book on my podcast. So now you have two ideas right in there and what I've learned from it. And then that could be a lead funnel. I love marketing. If you can tell, I could go on all day about it, but go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I used to struggle with answering the question, what do you do? And I always would lead in, well, I'm a lawyer by trade. Wanted everybody to know that I'm a lawyer. And but I have a vodka line. I own a clothing brand called Wicked Happy. I had a daily fantasy sports company. I'm on television. It just goes on. And I finally just realized, well, wait a minute, I'm an entrepreneur. This is what I do. So for me, a true entrepreneur, look, I like many classic entrepreneurs. I was that kid that mowed lawns in the summer and delivered newspapers throughout the entire year. And on hot days, I had lemonade stands. And when it came time to do the school fundraisers, I had no problem going door to door and selling a bunch of things so I could be on that leaderboard. And so I think Gary Vee, Jeff had mentioned it earlier, Gary Vee, talks a lot about this as well. I don't think entrepreneurship's for everybody, but I think everybody should have some level of entrepreneurship within them, especially if you want to help an organization grow. The stuff about entrepreneurship, the real struggle that we talk about and the things that you go through, I just don't think it's for everybody because it can be really dark and it can be really lonely. But the game essentially of business and entrepreneurship is something that appeals to me. And so I do love growing businesses. But the things again that a lot of people don't talk about is the failures. And some people do, but for the most part, people love to show the successes. And that's one of the biggest challenges that I mentioned earlier with social media is we see the quote successes and most of it isn't real. And I know that everybody knows that. But we all develop envy. I do. You look at stuff and you're like, whoa, like how did that happen? Or is that even real? And so you're trying to get there. But what you really need to understand is that if you want to be an entrepreneur, you have to figure out a way to be successful again in your own world and not someone else's world. And by the way, the definition of success is a fluid term. So many of us, again, want the cars, the watches, and all that other stuff on the big houses. I've had all that stuff and have a lot of that stuff. It doesn't make you successful. What makes you successful is what you want to be. So if you want that stuff, that's your own version of success. It might not necessarily be my own version of success. So when you see guys like Ty Lopez and Grant Cardone on the cars and the boats and all this other stuff and the jets, that's success to them. It doesn't necessarily mean it's success to you, and it also doesn't mean it's success to the world. So when people are struggling with entrepreneurship and also being successful, I say you define success how you want to be. And when you get there, then that's success.
That's great advice, Mike. I really love how you're talking about using, that the troubles that you had or the conflict that you had to motivate you. I think if we want to get Mike to do something, we'll tell him he can't. So that's fantastic that you were able to use that to empower yourself. That's really what you did. So, on that, let's get to our next guest here, Professor. We'd love to hear your question for Mike.
Thank you very much, Mike. It's a great work you're doing for our communities of writers and communicators. I just wanted to find out from you, in terms of hitting any of the list, are there specific bottlenecks that really stands in the way, or is it the pre-launch campaign that determines whether you're going to hit the WSJ list or the New York Times bestseller list? What, in your own experience, uh, is the ultimate set of steps that you need to take to hit the list a record time?
Yeah,
Thank you.
sure. Yeah, great question. In fact, I'm marketing a book right now called You Can't Fall Off the Floor by Jamie Prickett. It's the #1 nonfiction book on Amazon right now. It was the #1 book in the world on Barnes & Noble all week, and it's in hundreds of categories. It's beating William Barr's book, and who's on a massive media campaign. And it's a great question, and there's a lot involved. I tell people it's like a military operation that does take planning, execution, and consistency over time. But you asked, your first question was, is there a bottleneck? And I'll tell you a bottleneck that's happening right now. The bottleneck is within the printing and the shipping of books. I did a book for a former US ambassador, one of the most connected people that I had done a book for, knows everybody, presidents, the whole thing. And she had 5,000 pre-orders, which is a pretty decent number, and not one physical book shipped, even though the books were actually sitting on the warehouse, not one shipped. And she was distraught because her goal was to hit Wall Street and USA Today. My focus has always been on the digital side of things because I've been through that even before COVID. And with my last book, A Blueprint to Business, it was launched right around the time when there was the hurricane that destroyed Puerto Rico. And the government actually commandeered trucks that shipped books for Amazon and Ingram. And there was a scenario where we didn't think my books were actually going to make it to the proper warehouses to be shipped. And I was freaked out about that because I had probably spent 700,000, actually, no, that's what I spent on that book to promote it. And so the biggest bottleneck right now is the physical books. And so I say to people, if you're going to market a book right now, make sure you have a digital play. And I like to do the 99-cent offers. People do it and they think that it's just going to just, again, happen because the book is inexpensive. It goes back to what we were talking about earlier. You got to put in the work. You have to spend the money. You have to put in the marketing dollars. So right now, again, the biggest bottleneck is shipping and also printing. Look, Amazon, right, has a print on demand platform. Barnes and Noble does. They all do, right? Print on demand. Those words would mean that a book, once purchased, would print on demand, you would think. But right now, even Amazon's system, which is one of the greatest companies in the world, is having trouble printing on demand. When you're getting ready to launch your book now or in the future, make sure that you have a strong digital plan in place. And by the way, it's also a lot less expensive for you as the author to do it. Sorry about that. It's a lot less expensive to do it on the digital side because of just because of shipping, because of print costs. A lot of these book deals, and I work with some of the biggest publishers in the world in all different types, from the smaller kind of independents to the larger ones, and also I love the hybrid ones. A lot of times these book deals that people get, the author has to pay for the printing of the books. And that's where it can get really expensive. And it's more than just printing the books, it's also warehousing the books. And the biggest bottleneck right now is physical books and printing.
Yeah, and Professor was talking about getting on the best-selling lists. Are there any tips or tricks you can teach us?
Yeah, sell a lot of books in a really short period of time.
So that's what it's about, going out in the first week to really get you on the list, and that continues to boost you. Is that?
Yeah, Professor, you brought up another term as well as the pre-sales. So pre-sales are critical. You only have one opportunity at your publication date. You only have, so it doesn't change. Once you hit your publication date, then it's forever gone. And so pre-sales are important. Now, there are a lot of different things going on with the pre-sale world. If you're a self-published author and you're on like Amazon KDP doesn't allow authors, because of their print-on-demand system, doesn't allow physical books to be pre-ordered. So there's a bottleneck and a challenge there, that in and of itself. But they do allow the digital. So if you're going to just do it on KDP, and then maybe you're going to use Barnes and Noble's system as well. So you have to think about that. Pre-orders are important. My books, like my last book, Blueprint to Business, I actually hit Wall Street and USA Today before my book was even published. Like, how is that possible? How is that possible? Because they look at the numbers. Well, what happens is Amazon and Barnes and Noble and Books A Million and some of these other retailers, once they have the books in their warehouse, they ship just before your publication date because they want to get the books out of their warehouse. They don't necessarily care about your publication date. A lot of these lists, all of them, they count the books when they're shipped. And yeah, if you're going to market a book in an effort to hit Wall Street, USA Today, or even the New York Times, pre-sales are critical. And that's why I talked about earlier a 6-month run-up. So we knew with my books that we had X amount of books sold. I think my last one, we had 19,000 books pre-sold. And so we knew that when we went into our publication week, that we had a really good shot. Now, I didn't hit the New York Times with any of my books because the New York Times as well is a curated list. So it's not just about numbers. There are all these different factors. Is it actually a good book? There's a lot of horrible books that make the list. For New York Times as well, if you're not famous, if you're not writing a book about Trump or some political issue that's going on right now, it's really difficult to get on New York Times. Wall Street Journal is also somewhat of a curated list as well. So they're not just going to put some book out there that just came out of the blue and sold a bunch of copies. They will look at things like, what does your social media look like? Okay, so if you plan on really trying to make a run, make sure your social media is up to par. Make sure it looks good. Make sure you're posting content consistently. Make sure it's not just Instagram. Make sure you are on LinkedIn. Make sure you are on Facebook. Make sure you are on Twitter. Another thing too, when you think about success as an author, as far as selling books, don't rely on your followers. There was an article about 2 months ago in the New York Times about Billie Eilish and her book, and I think she has 60 million followers. And then they looked at others like Justin Timberlake, and their books were colossal failures. Their followers did not translate into sales. People say, oh, they're musicians, they're not going to buy the book. You would assume that they would at least buy, that at least 1% of the followers would at least buy the book, or 3%, which would just be a pretty big number. Then they go on and on about followers don't necessarily translate into sales. So you need to also think about, how can I induce people to buy the book? What can I do? And it goes back to, again, what I had said earlier. It's asking. It's consistently asking, to the point where it's almost annoying. If you really want to be a Wall Street, USA Today, New York Times best-selling author, you can't be bashful. You have to be relentless. You have to be, again, to the point where they're just going to unsubscribe or unfollow you. And Grant Cardone talks about that in the 10X book. You just need to just keep pushing, because, as I said earlier, nobody cares. Nobody cares as much as you do. So if you want that, and you want to level up, and you want to build your brand, which, again, for me, Jeff the Entrepreneur talked about podcasting as a great connection tool, and it has been an amazing connection tool for me. But I was on Grant Cardone's show Power Players back in 2015 or 14, I forget what it was, as a result of the success of my book, Ask More, Get More. When you traveled all over the country and flew all over the country, went to the Hudson Newses, it was my book Tony Robbins' book, Grant Cardone's book, and Ryan Blair's book. And I'm really good friends with Ryan Blair now as a result of that. I can text Grant and he'll respond. We're not besties, but he reached out to me as a result of that. And it's putting all those kind of pieces in play. And you have to sell a lot of books. When I say a lot, I'm talking thousands and thousands of books in a 1 week period, which is very difficult to do. One of the things that I use as a kind of I have a bunch of use cases, but Kevin Harrington, who's a good friend of mine, he's been on this app a bunch. He's literally created the infomercial. He sold billions of dollars worth of stuff. He's responsible for some of the biggest brands. He was on Shark Tank. He's connected with everybody. And Kevin launched his book with Mark Tim, who is one of the top resellers on Amazon. And they have a decent publisher, Hay House. And the book it did nothing on week one. He hired me. We sold 13,000 copies and we got him to number 2 on Wall Street and we got him on USA Today. I'm not selling you on me, but what I'm saying is that selling a book is really hard.
Wow. So you said a number 13,000. Colin told us he's writing a book. And I think there are other, Jeff, the entrepreneur, I believe you said you're writing a book. How many books would they have to sell approximately to get on the bestseller list?
So the term bestseller is somewhat of a bastardized term. Everybody's a bestseller these days, right? I can be. There was an article years ago where this guy took a picture of his foot, put it on the cover, and then published it on Amazon, became a bestseller. I think in like podiatry or something. So becoming a bestseller on Amazon is a bit of a joke. That's easy. Like the book I'm talking about right now, it's called "You Can't Fall Off the Floor" with Jamie Prickett. It's the #1 book in nonfiction. It has been all week. And we hit as high as number 23 on Amazon overall against all books. And the books that I market, I got Kevin Harrington to number 3 on Amazon against all books. And so the number it really depends on what is happening during that particular week. If there are some other big books that are coming out that have huge marketing campaigns behind them. But as far as like Wall Street and USA Today, if you're north of 6,000, you're going to be in a pretty good position to be on those 2 lists. New York Times, you're looking 10, 12,000 minimum to be there. But again, it's all the preparation that Colin's talking about. Like all the work you're putting in now, if you sell those, if you hit that number of books, then you should be in a pretty good position.
Great. So we didn't really touch too much on podcasts. We actually are launching a podcast here at Serial Entrepreneur. I'd love to get your advice on what are the top 3 things that we can do to be successful in the launch of a podcast.
Yeah, one of the first things is starting. Jeff, the entrepreneur, who I like to pressure him a little bit. He says he's going to start a podcast, and he's been talking about writing this book for a year and a half. I think he left. It is what it is. So the first thing is starting. The barrier of entry, we had this little pre-call before, and I'm sitting in an actual sound studio and that was built for a sound studio years ago, not necessarily as a podcast room. And I had a mentor of mine say, "Hey, Mike, we should start doing a podcast." I think it was going on 9 years ago. I'm like, who am I going to interview? He said, start with local entrepreneurs, start there and then just go. I think a lot of people get caught up in the technology, and I am I can barely swing a hammer. I'm not very tech savvy. But I think people get caught up in, okay, do I need a microphone? What kind of microphone? How do I upload it? All these things. How do I record it? Look, Zoom is free, okay? I do a lot of my podcasts via Zoom. I had Tim Story on my podcast. By the way, my podcast is called The Alden Report. I'd love for you guys to check it out, subscribe, and I had Tim Story, all Tim Story. The guy's a legend, okay? I would normally do it right here in the studio, but my daughter had a soccer game and I was like, I don't miss my daughter's athletic events and I wasn't going to miss this with him. So I brought my laptop with me and I brought a headset with me. So the audio quality wasn't perfect. And the goal was I was going to drive to the soccer field and I was going to do it right from there. I got caught in traffic. And the challenge is now I was running up against the time that Tim was supposed to be on. So I pull over on the side of the highway, essentially in Quincy, Massachusetts, with my laptop and my headset. And I interviewed Tim Story in my car. And Tim says, Mike, I've been on Oprah, I've been on Ellen, I've been interviewed by Larry King. You're the first person that's ever interviewed me in their car. And it's on YouTube. My YouTube channel isn't that strong. We do really well on all the streaming services. So it's starting. Don't worry about the audio quality. You can have a great podcast with just the headphones that come with your iPhone. It's that simple. It's starting there. It goes back to also the simplicity. Now, so the other part I would say is the content, right? Whatever you want to talk about it and be authentic with that. It's the content that matters. It's not the production quality. One of my biggest infomercials I shot in Gloucester, Massachusetts, in a basement for $6,000. I'm like orange, the other guy's pale. You can see the backdrop. We have what they call jump cuts, which is something that like you can. It looks like all of a sudden he was just pasted there. The whole thing from a cinematography standpoint is just horrible. But that infomercial for 6,000 generated $150 million because of the content. So when you're thinking about your podcast, let's think about the content, and then back to my more kind of original statements of asking, reaching out. Like I personally reach out to people asking them to come on my podcast, and I don't care if you're famous. One of my podcasts that I enjoyed the most was I interviewed my boss for 35 years. This guy's been cutting hair, and he has a lot to say, and he's been in business for a long time. So don't also necessarily try to get that big person on. They will come, and I've had Nolan Bushnell on, I've had Les Brown on, I've had Brad Lee on, I've had Forbes Riley on, and it goes on and on. But it started out with a local entrepreneur in my hometown who had a coffee shop. So just start.
Yeah, Mike, that's great stuff. Mike has been on my podcast show. I've been blessed to be on his podcast show. I couldn't agree more. And I'm going to give another shortcut to the listeners. And that is, I've had some amazing guests on my show. And I was telling Mike a story about this guy who, it's Mike, what was it called? The Longest 7 Yards? The movie
Oh, yeah.
with Chris Norton?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Chris Norton, so I had Chris on my podcast. I saw a YouTube video of his, and then you reached out to me, and and then you just reached out to him.
Yeah. So what I did was I called Mike. I said, Mike, I saw this great movie. You got to see it. I cried the whole way through the movie. It's Chris Norton. He had 300 million views on his social media. Who has that? That's like a whole country. And I said, Mike, you got to see the movie. He says, Mike, I had him on my podcast show. So Mike made an introduction, and sure enough, because Mike has such a great reputation. Chris took my call, and we set it up, and he was on my show. And what an honor that was! But anyway, that's another way to get started. Call people up that know people and say, "Would you mind making a recommendation? Can I use your name?" And that will again ease some of the pressure and get you to the front of the line.
Excellent. Yes, we've actually done 50 podcasts here. We actually use Clubhouse as the mechanism to record and build the content. It's been a really efficient way for us to do that. However, I don't believe it's build it and they will come. So, is there anything other to really get the word out that you would suggest that's on the top of your list, Mike?
Yeah. It does come down to when you look at some of these successful podcasts, they are putting marketing dollars behind it. Some of the bigger ones, you got famous people like Joe Rogan, that's a little bit different. But you got guys like Lewis Howes who really leveraged celebrity, and he's out in LA and he's done a great job with that podcast, The School of Greatness. So if you can get a big name, of course, but no, you're not going to be able to start there. But one of the mistakes that I've made throughout the years is once you have somebody on the podcast, you need to ask them to make sure that they promote it for you as well. And so you do that by one, sending them the actual podcast itself. The other thing that I do that really helps with promoting the podcast is I give them the full file and say, you can do whatever you want with it. I'm a lawyer. I respect intellectual property more than most. But at the same time, if they cut it up and they put it out there and they do some 1-minute clips, that's just going to promote me and just promote the podcast. So don't necessarily be scared about giving your intellectual property out to them in an effort to continue to grow your brand. So when you do have somebody that's on, ask them to promote it because that's, especially if you have somebody that's big. Grant Cardone's been on my podcast twice, and Brad Lee and some of these other guys with some big followings. Make sure that you ask them and almost insist that you ask them. And I tell you what, I know we're getting towards the end of the hour. I'm going to give a tip for those that are still here, and if you do start a podcast, this is something that I've done, and Jeff the Entrepreneur and Mike talked a little bit about this, about connecting, okay? The podcast, for me, has been one of the greatest connection tools, short of Clubhouse. Clubhouse has been the greatest connection tool I think I've seen in the past 15 years. When you have a guest on the podcast, depending on how you do it, a lot of times I might start with a DM on Instagram or DM on Twitter or Facebook or what have you, and then you bring them to a Calendly link or a Zoom link or whatever it is, right? You might not have all of their contact information. When you're done with the podcast, I always like to have a little bit of a recap with them, and I ask them instantly, hey, what's your cell phone number? I want to send you a text. Now, I do this with everybody. And I only had one person pause, and I won't say who they were. But so I've had some big names on my podcast. And again, I'm not necessarily friends with all those people, but I have their cell phone number and I can text them, because if you ask them that question really quickly, they're just going to give it to you. And why would you want to do that? You're building your network, and people talk about that. My next book, by the way, is titled Connection Capital. And so if you're going to spend that time with them, and why would you want the cell phone for the most immediate thing? Why do you want their number? You're not just going to send them a text late at night saying, hey, what's up? Let's be friends. When that podcast is available, then you text it to them. Now you have a conversation with them. Then you can follow up with it. Then you can follow through with it. And if you send it to, again, like a Bradley or somebody who's also has some other great connections, like what Michael also just said, hey, man, loved having you on. You killed it. Man, we just created some magic. Is there anybody else that you think would be a good fit for the podcast? That's why you'd want their number, not to just send them a text message late at night or just try to send them a message just for the sake of doing it, but it's to continue to grow that network and also build your relationship with them.
It's great
That's the
advice.
first time I've said that publicly, by the way. So
Yeah, I love that. It's really great advice. And for me, I also think it's a good way to share opportunities that might be of interest to them as well. So it's a really give, share, quick way to
absolutely.
do that. Excellent. So we have our last person on the stage, Connor. But first, I want to mention that we have a phenomenal website that we've spent the past year building. We have, oh gosh, probably a couple of hundred sessions recorded, blogs, transcripts, you name it, as well as links to our podcast, which is the Serial Entrepreneur Club, which is on all major podcast networks now. And this is our 50th episode. So, as Mike said, I'm asking you, please go follow our podcast and join our email list on startup. We publish content that's purely for learning for entrepreneurs and startups. You don't have to be the person that is leading the startup. You could be one that is aspiring entrepreneur, or maybe you work for an entrepreneur, but there's tons and tons of really useful information, and we really want people to get exposure to it, and it's all free. So go to www.startup.club to join our email list or follow our podcast, which is Serial Entrepreneur Club. Okay, Connor, over to you for the last question for Mike.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So I'm a sustainability professional, and I'll be creating our online course shortly. Part of that will be interviewing experts and including those 15-minute interviews in the course. So I guess my question is, I'd love to create a podcast as well, but I'd just love to get your insight of, is it then duplication if I'm then creating a podcast with that content and it's then free for everyone? And then maybe it devalues the course because people are maybe thinking, actually, I thought I'd only get that premium content inside the course if I pay. So that's probably my first question. And just to follow up, what is the number one tech you'd recommend for podcast starting?
Yeah, I think that's a tricky question, and I think it really comes down to a matter of what you want to do and how you want to be perceived in your program. Go back to Gary Vee, who talks about he gave out his 48-page marketing deck years ago and says, "Here's my plan. This is what I do." And just gave it away for free, and so a lot of people will be like, "Why would you do that? You can charge for that." So I think really the best practice would be to add in things into your course that are exclusive to your course and not out there necessarily available for free. And when you're doing your podcast about sustainability, you can maybe think about some things that you want to be a part of the paid program, because I think people might feel like, man, I can get that stuff for free. So I would be definitely cognizant of what your customers will perceive when you do push that out there. So that would be my my take on that. And then the other thing, as far as the tech, I don't have the answer for you. I think you're looking at the Rodecaster, I think it's called, is a really good device that people use to record. I think that's what it's called. I think it's $500, so you can get like a whole package, or maybe like upwards of 700. But honestly, to get started, look, Zoom is free for the most part, so you can just do Zoom. And then if you really wanted to spend a little bit of money, you can just get a microphone like for $150 with the USB plug-in. And then as far as uploading it, I got a team over here that does it. I know there are some platforms that people don't like, and as it relates to the proprietary nature of your intellectual property. I don't know the exact ones that people don't like, but once you do record it, you can upload it to these platforms that will then distribute it to everything. And I would actually literally just start with Zoom for now. And if you want to get a Rodecaster, I think that's what they're called, you can get one of those and just get the decent audio quality. But again, I think people get caught up in that. And by the way, if you are doing sustainability, check out, there's a company called Change is Simple, actually in Beverly, Massachusetts. And the guy's last name is Belmonte. You might want to interview him. He's been doing that for a long time.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Super appreciate it. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Hey, Michele, what's the platform we use to distribute Startup Club, or Serial Entrepreneur Club? Michele?
Hold on. It's Libsyn. It's like a Libsyn. Yeah, it's an aggregator so that you can basically list on all the different podcast platforms. I believe there's several of those. It just makes it a little bit easier.
Oh, that's awesome. All right, we're gonna have to close the show here. We went 8 minutes over. What a great show, Mike Alden and Jeff the Entrepreneur and Mike Alshler. We really appreciate you coming on to this episode. Next week we have Bhavin Turkai, and he is a serial entrepreneur. He's launched multiple unicorns, and he is a billionaire himself. I've known him for about 15, 20 years. And sometimes in business, as entrepreneurs, we've been competitors, and we have also worked together on projects. And I can't tell you how excited I am to have him come on to our show next Friday at 2:00 Eastern. Bhavin Turkai, and the title of the show is How to Create a Unicorn. And this show and a lot of the shows that we've done are a basis for the book that I'm working on, Start, Scale, Exit, Repeat. So it's very interesting to hear that when Jeff talked about reusing some of the content and the interviews, etc., for his podcast inside his book, that's what we're doing here as well. We're trying to crack that code. What is it that serial entrepreneurs do over and over again? What is that secret sauce? What did Mike Alden do over and over again? And Bhavin Turkai and Mike Alshler and all of the serial entrepreneurs who come on this show, we're trying to crack that code. And if we do, we believe we can help a lot of startups launch their businesses successfully. Thank you very much. We'll see you next week.
Thank you so much, Mike. Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.